The room smelled like lemon pledge and stale anxiety. It was that specific sterile scent of university conference rooms that haunts you for decades. Room 304, the killing floor, we used to joke would be on me. I stood at the podium. My hands were gripping the edges so hard my knuckles had turned the color of old bone. The hum of the projector fan was the loudest thing in the world. It sounded like a chainsaw revving up in the distance. On the screen behind me was Slide 42, Conclusion and Future Applications, the culmination of 4 years of my life, 4 years of sleeping under a desk, 4 years of missed birthdays, skipped holidays, and eating ramen until my sodium levels were a medical emergency. I took a breath. I was done. I had nailed it. The algorithm worked. The optimization metrics were off the charts. I looked at the committee. Dean Miller was nodding. That was good. He was the tough sell. Dr. Lin was smiling, already writing something on her evaluation sheet that looked like approved. And then there was Dr. Vance, my advisor, my mentor, the man I had idolized since I was an undergrad reading his papers in my dorm room. Vance wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his fingernails. He looked bored. Then, slowly, he reached into his leather satchel. The leather creaked. In the absolute silence of that room, it sounded like a gunshot. He pulled out a thick stack of papers. They were stapled in the corner. He didn't look at me. He looked at Dean Miller. "I'm sorry," Vance said. His voice was soft, sad, like a disappointed father. "I really didn't want to do this here. I tried to give him a chance to come clean privately." The air left the room. My heart stopped. I mean that literally. I felt a skip in my chest that made my vision blur. "Excuse me, Dr. Vance." Dean Miller lowered his glasses. "What is this?" Vance sighed. He stood up. He walked over to the table and dropped the stack of papers in the center. Thud. "This," Vance said, pointing a manicured finger at the stack, "is my original manuscript, dated 18 months ago. It contains the core architecture of the neural network Kenji just presented." Silence. Absolute suffocating silence. I blinked. I couldn't process the words. It was like he was speaking a foreign language. "Dr. Vance, what are you talking about?" My voice cracked. I sounded like a child. I hated myself for it. Vance finally looked at me. His eyes were wet. He looked heartbroken. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. "Kenji," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I know you were under pressure. I know the grant deadline was tight. But to steal my personal notes? To repackage my unpublished work as your own dissertation? I expected better from you. I welcomed you into my lab. I treated you like family. I wrote that code. I screamed. I didn't mean to scream. It just ripped out of my throat. I wrote every line. You don't even know Python." "You asked me how to open a Jupyter notebook last week?" Dr. Lin looked down at the table. She wouldn't meet my eyes. That was the moment I knew I was in trouble. "Please," Vance whispered, holding up a hand, "let's not make this uglier than it is. I have the timestamps. I have the original commit logs on my private server. I was letting Kenji use the data for training purposes. I never authorized him to claim the architecture as his invention." He turned to the dean. "I recommend immediate expulsion and a formal review by the Academic Integrity Board. This is intellectual property theft of the highest order. This is my life's work he's trying to walk away with." My ears started ringing, high-pitched, piercing. The room started to spin. I looked at the screen behind me, my graphs, my data, my life. Vance walked over to the wall and hit the light switch. The room flooded with harsh fluorescent light. It washed out my slides. It washed out my future. "I think we're done here," Vance said cold, dismissing me like a waiter who got the order wrong. Dean Miller looked at me. His face was hard now. The nodding was gone. "Kenji, do you have a response to these allegations?" I opened my mouth. I wanted to explain the nights I spent debugging while Vance was at wine tastings. I wanted to explain how I built the kernel from scratch while Vance was consulting in Bali. But my brain was short-circuiting. Vance had access to everything. My repository, my backups. He was the admin. If he said he had earlier timestamps, he could have forged them. He could have planted files. He had been planning this. While I was working for him, he was building a trap for me. I looked at Vance. He offered a sad, tight smile to Dr. Lin, a smile that said, "It's so hard being a genius surrounded by cheaters." But then I saw it. Just for a split second. Vance looked back at me. The sad mask slipped. His eyes went cold, dead. And the corner of his mouth twitched up, a smirk, a tiny, imperceptible smirk that said, "I own you. I own your work, and nobody will ever believe a grad student over a tenured professor." I felt the bile rise in my throat. I grabbed the edge of the podium to keep from falling over. I wasn't just going to fail. I was going to be blacklisted. My visa would be revoked. I would be sent back home in disgrace. My parents, God, my parents, they had sold their shop to pay for my first year. I looked at that stack of papers on the table, the lie that was about to bury me. Most people would cry. Most people would beg. In that moment, staring at the man who was murdering my future, something inside me snapped. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't fear, it was clarity, because Dr. Vance made one critical mistake, one tiny, arrogant oversight. He thought he was stealing a finished product. He didn't know about the dead man's switch buried in line 4000 of the code. But let me back up. To understand how I burned his entire world to the ground, you have to understand how I ended up in his dungeon in the first place. To understand the magnitude of the screw-up, you have to understand the myth of Dr. Julian Vance. 4 years ago, I wasn't a nervous wreck with high blood pressure and a caffeine addiction. I was a 23-year-old kid fresh out of Tokyo University, holding a master's degree and a dream. I had offers from MIT and Stanford. I turned them down. I turned them down because of a YouTube video. It was a TED Talk Vance gave in 2018. The Symbiotic Mind. It had 5 million views. In the video, Vance walked around the stage in a black turtleneck and designer glasses, talking about the future of neural networks like he was prophesying a new religion. He was charismatic. He was articulate. He made AI sound like poetry. I wanted to be him. I remember the Skype interview. It was 3 a.m. in Tokyo. I was wearing a suit jacket over my pajama bottoms. Vance leaned into the camera, smiling that $1 million smile. "Henji," he said, "I don't want code monkeys. I can hire 100 engineers to write code. I want architects. I want visionaries. Come to my lab, and we will rewrite the operating system of the world." My parents were so proud. My father ran a small electronics repair shop in Akihabara. Not the flashy tourist traps, but a tiny, cluttered stall where he fixed vintage amplifiers. He sold the shop. He sold the inventory. He cashed in his modest retirement fund to pay for my relocation and cover the tuition gaps that the stipend didn't reach. "Go," he told me at the airport. He didn't hug me. We don't really do that. But he gripped my shoulder. "Show them what we can do. Bring honor to your name." That was the baggage I carried into the States. A suitcase full of instant miso soup and the weight of my family's entire financial future. I arrived on campus in late August. The leaves were turning gold. The main quad looked like a movie set. I walked into the computer science building, heart pounding, looking for the Vance Artificial Intelligence Group. I expected a glass-walled laboratory, maybe some sleek white desks, a robotic arm pouring coffee. Instead, the department secretary handed me a key with a sticky note on it. "Basement level," she said, not even looking up from her phone. "Room B14. Room B14 wasn't a lab. It was a storage closet that had been promoted. It had no windows. The ventilation system rattled like a dying tractor. There were 3 desks crammed together, covered in a tangle of Ethernet cables and empty Red Bull cans. The air smelled of ozone, old carpet, and desperation. This was the Symbiotic Mind headquarters. That first year, I barely saw Vance. He was a ghost, a very expensive ghost. He was always traveling. A keynote in Geneva, a consultation in Silicon Valley, a retreat in Aspen. We communicated via Slack. He would send messages at odd hours. "Henji, great progress. Need to push harder on the optimization. Funding review is coming up." He never asked how the optimization worked. He just wanted the graph to go up. I threw myself into the work. I had no friends. I didn't understand American football. I couldn't afford to go out to bars. My life shrank down to the size of my 27-inch monitor. I was building Chimera. That was my project. It was a novel approach to unsupervised learning. Most AI needs to be told what it's looking at. This is a cat, this is a dog. Chimera was designed to figure out the rules of the game without being told the rules. It was impossibly hard. I spent 6 months just on the data ingestion layer. I slept in the lab 3 nights a week. I bought a cheap camping mat and rolled it out under my desk. I learned which vending machines gave extra change. By year 2, the cracks started to show. Not in the code, but in Vance. I finally pinned him down for a meeting. I needed guidance on a vanishing gradient problem, technical stuff, complicated math. I printed out the equations. I walked into his office upstairs. His office was beautiful, mahogany desk, awards on the wall, a view of the park. It was the opposite of the dungeon I lived in. Kenji. He beamed, standing up to shake my hand. He looked tan, my star pupil. How's the magic happening? I laid the papers on his desk. I'm stuck, Dr. Vance. The loss function isn't converging. I think the derivative calculation in the 3rd layer is unstable. If you look here, I pointed to the math. I waited for him to nod, to squint, to grab a pen and correct me. Vance looked at the paper. His smile didn't fade, but his eyes glazed over. He looked at the equation like a dog watching a card trick. He didn't understand it. He didn't understand the math. Kenji, he said, pushing the paper back to me gently. You're getting lost in the weeds. This is engineering. I'm a big picture guy. You figure out the nuts and bolts. That's why you're the genius here, right? Just make it work. He patted my shoulder. I have a donor dinner in 20 minutes. Fix it. I believe in you. I walked out of that office feeling cold. My advisor, the famous AI guru, couldn't read a basic calculus proof. I started digging. I looked up his publication history. He hadn't been the first author on a paper in 10 years. His name was always last. The senior supervisor, the one who brings the money. The students did the work. He put his name on it. He toured the world taking credit. That's academia, right? I told myself it was normal. He provides the funding. I provide the brain. It's a trade. But the trade started to feel lopsided. Year 3. Chimera started working. It was terrifyingly good. It was identifying patterns and noise that standard models missed completely. Vance suddenly got very interested. He started showing up in the basement. He would stand behind my chair, watching the code scroll by. He brought me coffee. It felt nice, at first. This is it, Kenji. He whispered one night, watching the accuracy metrics climb. This is the Nobel. This is the cover of Nature. Then the request started. Send me the raw data, Kenji. I need to secure the backups on the faculty server. Send me the source code for the new module. I want to review the syntax. I hesitated. Dr. Vance, the code is messy. I haven't commented it yet. It's fine, he insisted. It's for the department archives, compliance protocols. You know how the bureaucracy is. I sent it. I sent him everything. Why wouldn't I? He was my boss. He held my visa status in his hands. If he fired me, I had 60 days to leave the country. I'd go back to Japan a failure. My father would have sold his shop for nothing. I was a good soldier. I uploaded the repositories to the shared drive. A month later, we went to a conference in San Diego. Vance was the keynote speaker. I was excited. He had told me he was going to showcase our progress. I sat in the front row, wearing my one good suit. Vance got on stage. The lights dimmed. He put up a slide. Project Chimera, a new era. My heart swelled. That was my name for it. He kept the name. He started talking. He described the architecture. He described the breakthrough. He used my graphs. He used my exact diagrams, the ones I drew in Microsoft Paint at 4 a.m. because I didn't have Photoshop. He spoke for 45 minutes. He was brilliant. The audience was eating it up. I waited. I waited for the slide that said lead researcher, Kenji Sato. I waited for him to point to me in the crowd. I waited for the acknowledgement. It never came. In conclusion, Vance said, basking in the applause, this architecture I developed represents a fundamental shift in how we approach machine learning. I developed, not we, not my teen. I sat there, frozen. People were clapping. Someone next to me leaned over. He's amazing. Isn't he a true genius? I wanted to vomit. I confronted him at the hotel bar afterwards. He was holding a martini, surrounded by admirers. He saw me and waved me over, draping an arm around my shoulder. Dr. Vance, I whispered, pulling away. You said you developed it. You didn't mention my name. His expression changed instantly. The warmth vanished. He leaned in close, so only I could hear. His breath smelled of expensive gin. Kenji, he hissed. You're a student. You're an apprentice. Do you think Michelangelo's assistant signed the Sistine Chapel? No. They mix the paint. You're mixing the paint. When you graduate, you'll get your turn. Don't be petty. It's unbecoming. He patted my cheek. Go get some rest. You look tired. We have a lot of work to do before your defense next year. I went back to my hotel room. I stared at the ceiling. I felt small. I felt used. But I also felt something else. I remembered the code. I remembered how he looked at the math equations with that blank, confused stare. He had the files. Yes, he had the paint. But he didn't know how to mix it. He didn't know the brush strokes. He had the what, but he didn't have the how. I went back to the lab. I stopped sleeping. But I wasn't just working on the project anymore. I was working on insurance. I started adding things to the code. Tiny, invisible things. Comments that looked like gibberish, but were actually timestamps. Functions that seemed redundant, but served a specific secret purpose. I became paranoid. I started keeping a second, encrypted version of the repository on a private server he didn't know about. But even then, I underestimated him. I thought he just wanted the glory. I thought he just wanted to be the face of the project. I didn't know he was planning to cut me out completely. I didn't know he was already talking to investors about a startup. A startup based on my technology, with him as the CEO/founder, and me nowhere on the org chart. He needed to get rid of me. If I graduated, I became a rival. I became a liability. I became someone who could say, I built that. So he had to make sure I never graduated. He had to make sure I was discredited before I could ever open my mouth. He didn't just want to steal my work. He wanted to destroy my credibility so that if I ever accused him, I would look like a desperate lying student attacking a titan of industry. And that brought us to room 304. The setup was complete. He had the papers. He had the fake timestamps. He had the dean in his pocket. He thought he had won, but he forgot one thing. He forgot that he was dealing with the guy who built the machine, and the machine always knows its master. The 6 months leading up to the defense were a blur of flickering fluorescent lights and the sour taste of permanent exhaustion. If the first 3 years were a marathon, this was a sprint through a minefield. It started with the admin review. One Tuesday morning, I arrived at the lab to find a stranger sitting at my desk. He was a young guy, maybe a year older than me, wearing a sharp suit that probably cost more than my car. He was scrolling through my local directories. Can I help you? I asked, my voice tight. My desk was my sanctuary, my private notes, my half-eaten granola bars, my pictures of home. It was all I had left. Kenji, there you are. Vance's voice boomed from the doorway. He walked in, looking energized. This is Marcus. He's a consultant from the tech transfer office. We're doing a routine audit of all lab assets. You know, for patent filing, standardization. Marcus didn't look up. He didn't even acknowledge me. He was plugging an external drive into my machine. Dr. Vance, I'm in the middle of a training run, I said, stepping toward my computer. If the colonel panics now, I lose 3 days of computation. Don't worry about it, Vance said, his hand heavy on my shoulder. It felt like a lead weight. Marcus is a pro. Why don't you take the day off? Go get some sun, Kenji. You're looking gray. Seriously, take the afternoon. It's an order. I didn't take the afternoon off. I sat in the library, staring at a blank wall, feeling a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. When I returned that evening, Marcus was gone. My computer was exactly where I left it, but the last modified dates on my core library files had all been updated to 2:15 p.m. They weren't just auditing, they were copying. A week later, the gaslighting began in earnest. Vance called me into his office to review the draft of our main paper for the Journal of Artificial Intelligence. This was the big one, the one that would solidify my PhD. He handed me the printed manuscript. I looked at the cover page. Neural Heuristics in Unsupervised Environments by Dr. Julian Vance. I flipped the page. I looked for my name. Usually, the student is the first author and the professor is the last. I wasn't the first author. I wasn't the second. My name wasn't there at all, not even in the acknowledgments. Dr. Vance, there's a typo on the cover, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. My name is missing. Vance looked up from his iPad, seemingly confused. He took the paper, squinted at it, and then chuckled. Oh, that. Right. Look, Kenji, we talked about this. This specific paper focuses on the high-level theoretical framework. It's the Vance methodology. Since I developed the theory back in 2018, it wouldn't make sense to list you as a primary author. It would confuse the reviewers. The Vance methodology? I stammered. I developed that logic in B14 last Christmas. I have the whiteboard photos. Vance's expression shifted. The warm, fatherly mask didn't drop. It hardened. It became a wall of polite condescension. Kenji, you're confused. You implemented it. You're the technician. A very talented one, don't get me wrong. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You'll have plenty of papers in the future. Right now, we need this to pass peer review, and my name carries the weight. Yours doesn't. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You want to graduate in June, don't you? The threat wasn't even veiled. It was draped in a silk shroud. Do what I say, or the degree goes away. I went back to the basement. I sat in the dark. I realized then that I wasn't his student anymore. I was his ghostwriter. I was the person building the car so he could drive it to the podium and claim he invented the wheel. Then came the data corruption. I was preparing the final benchmarks for my dissertation. I needed the historical training logs from the department server, the ones Vance had insisted on securing months earlier. When I tried to log in, I got an access denied error. I called the IT department. Hey, this is Kenji Sato from the Vance Lab. I'm locked out of my project folder. 1 second, Tech said. I heard typing. Kenji, it looks like that directory has been reclassified as proprietary faculty research. Only the principal investigator has read-write access. I'm the one who created the directory. Sorry, man. Dr. Vance signed the reclassification form yesterday. You'll have to ask him for the files. I didn't ask him. I knew what the answer would be. He would say he was cleaning up the permissions or protecting the IP. I felt like I was being erased. One file at a time, one paper at a time, Kenji Sato was disappearing from the academic record. But Vance wasn't as smart as he thought he was. He was a social engineer, not a software engineer. He understood power dynamics, but he didn't understand the soul of a machine. He didn't realize that every time Marcus copied my drive, or every time Vance reviewed my code, he was looking at a version of Chimera that I had subtly altered. I started a game of digital breadcrumbs. In the version of the code I kept on the university's server, the one I knew he was stealing, I began to introduce personality. Not bugs, not errors. The code worked perfectly, but I wrote the logic in a way that was uniquely, stubbornly mine. I used variable names that were phonetic Japanese puns. I structured the loops in a way that followed the rhythm of a specific haiku I liked. Most importantly, I moved the core weights of the neural network into an obscure submodule that looked like a standard utility library. To anyone else, it looked like optimized C++. To me, it was a signature written in invisible ink. The pressure at home was ramping up too. My father called me every Sunday. How is the great Dr. Vance, he would ask. Is he pleased with your work? We saw his interview on the news. He mentioned the breakthrough. We told the neighbors our son is the right hand of a genius. I would bite my tongue until it bled. Yes, father, he's very pleased. Everything is on track. I couldn't tell him. That his sacrifice had bought me a seat in a dungeon where I was being robbed of my identity. If I failed now, I wasn't just losing a job. I was destroying the myth that kept my father's head high in the neighborhood. By the time the final month arrived, Vance had stopped pretending to be my mentor. He became a taskmaster. He would send me corrections for my dissertation that were actually attempts to rewrite history. Remove the section on the recursive feedback loop, he'd write. It sounds too much like your own idea. Rephrase it to show it was an extension of my 2019 lecture notes. He was building a paper trail of proof that he was the visionary and I was just the hands. The final blow came 2 weeks before the defense. I was in the lab at 3 a.m. I found a printed document in the communal trash can. It was a term sheet. A venture capital firm in Palo Alto was offering $12 million in Series A funding for a new company called Vance-AI Systems. The core product? Chimera. The founders? Dr. Julian Vance and Marcus Thorne. Marcus.
Yeah.
The guy who sat at my desk and copied my life into a thumb drive. I wasn't even mentioned in the P personnel section. I was listed under potential hires contractors, with a note next to my name in Vance's handwriting. Keep on as consultant if needed, otherwise phase out post-graduation. Phase out. That was the plan. Use me to get the degree. Use my work to get the $12 million. And then discard me like a used filter. I sat down at my terminal. I opened the real version of Chimera, the one I kept on my private encrypted cloud. I began to write the final update. If Vance wanted to claim he was the author of the code, fine. I would give him the code. I would give him the most beautiful, efficient, and impressive version of the code he could ever imagine. But I added a language filter. It was a piece of logic buried deep in the tensor processing unit. It checked the system clock and the user credentials. If the code was run on a date after my defense and it didn't find a specific encrypted key file on my personal USB drive, it would start to change. Not a crash. A crash is easy to fix. It would slowly, imperceptibly begin to degrade. The accuracy would drop by 0.1% every hour. The logical reasoning would start to introduce tiny, nonsensical hallucinations. And hidden in the metadata of every output file the AI generated would be a string of hex code that, when converted to text, read, "Stolen from Kenji Sato, property of the Sato family." Vance thought he was stealing a car. He didn't realize I was the one who decided if the brakes worked. I spent the next 14 days acting like a broken man. I let him yell at me. I let him correct my slides. I played the part of the exhausted, submissive student perfectly. "Are you ready for the defense, Kenji?" he asked me the day before the killing floor meeting. He was wearing a new suit, probably bought with the VC deposit. "And ready, Dr. Vance," I said, looking at my shoes. "Good. It's going to be a day to remember." He had no idea how right he was. The morning of the defense was gray and claustrophobic. Rain smeared against the windows of the computer science building, turning the campus into a watercolor painting of misery. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, tying my tie for the 4th time. My hands were shaking so violently I nearly ripped the silk. I looked at my reflection and didn't recognize the man staring back. My eyes were sunken, rimmed with red from a week of 3-hour sleep cycles. I looked like a ghost. Vance, on the other hand, looked like a god. When I walked into room 304, he was already there, leaning against the mahogany table, laughing with Dean Miller and Dr. Lin. He was holding a latte, looking relaxed, radiant, and utterly in control. He looked like he owned the building. He looked like he owned me. "Ah, the man of the hour," Vance exclaimed, spreading his arms wide. "Everyone, look at him." The pressure of the PhD. We've all been there, haven't we? The committee chuckled. It was a light-hearted, collegial moment. But when Vance's eyes met mine, there was no warmth. There was only the cold, predatory calculation of a man about to clear a hurdle. I set up my laptop. My fingers felt like lead. I plugged in the HDMI cable, and my title slide appeared on the big screen. Chimera, a novel architecture for unsupervised cognition. "Whenever you're ready, Kenji," Dean Miller said, checking his watch. For the first 20 minutes, it was perfect. I knew this material better than I knew my own name. I spoke about the neural pathways, the weight distribution, the way the system handled chaotic noise. I saw Dr. Lin nodding, impressed. I saw the dean leaning forward, intrigued by the efficiency metrics. I felt a spark of hope. Maybe I was wrong, I thought. Maybe he'll let me have this one win. Maybe the degree is enough for him. I reached slide 35, the logic core. This was the heart of the invention. And here, I said, pointing to the diagram, is where the system differentiates between correlation and causation. By using a recursive feedback loop, I'm going to stop you right there, Kenji. Vance's voice wasn't loud. It was soft, almost apologetic, but it cut through my sentence like a razor. I froze. Dr. Vance. Vance stood up slowly. He didn't look at me. He looked at the dean. He looked like a man who was about to perform a tragic but necessary duty. I can't let this go any further, Vance said, his voice trembling with a fake, manufactured emotion. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes hoping, praying that you would change these slides, that you would give credit where it's due. But you're doubling down on the lie. The room went ice cold. Dean Miller frowned. Julian? What is the meaning of this? Vance sighed, a long theatrical sound of heartbreak. He reached into his leather satchel, the one I had seen earlier, and pulled out a thick-bound manuscript. It had a university seal on it. It looked official. It looked old. This is my personal research journal, Vance said, his voice dropping to a somber whisper. Dated 2 years ago, it contains the exact logic for the recursive feedback loop Kenji just claimed to have invented. It even uses the same variable names. He walked over to the committee and placed the book on the table with a heavy thud. I noticed the similarities a few months ago, Vance continued, his eyes now welling up with tears. I confronted Kenji privately. I told him he needed to cite the foundational work, my work. He promised me he would. He told me he just borrowed the framework for the draft. But here we are, at his final defense. And he is presenting my intellectual property as his own. I felt the floor tilt. The walls of the room seemed to lean inward, suffocating me. That's a lie, I whispered. I tried to say it louder, but my throat was closing up. That's a lie. I wrote that. You know I wrote that. Kenji, please, Vance said, holding up a hand. Don't make this a scene. I know the pressure of the scholarship was high. I know your family back in Japan is counting on you. But academic integrity is the foundation of everything we do. To steal from your mentor, to plagiarize the very hand that fed you. He turned to the dean, his face a mask of righteous indignation. I've checked the timestamps on the department's server. I had the IT department run a forensic audit. The files in Kenji's directory were moved there after I had already logged the core architecture in my private faculty vault. He didn't just copy the idea. He hacked my private backups to steal the source code. My mind screamed. He was using the admin review Marcus had done. He had manipulated the metadata. He had used his power to move my files into his vault and then backdated them. He had turned the very evidence of my hard work into a weapon against me. This is a serious accusation, Julian, Dean Miller said, his voice now hard and professional. He looked at me, and there was no kindness left in his eyes. Kenji, do you have the original drafts? The dated notebooks? They were in my desk. I shouted, in B14, but they're gone. Someone went through my desk 2 weeks ago. Vance shook his head sadly. The someone stole my homework defense. Really, Kenji? We're in a PhD defense, not middle school. Dr. Lin was looking at the manuscript Vance had provided. Her face went pale. The math, it's identical. Even the notation is the same. Kenji, how do you explain this? I couldn't explain it. How do you explain that the man you trusted has spent 6 months building a digital cage around you? How do you explain that he's a fraud who doesn't understand the very math he's claiming to own? I didn't steal it, I said, my voice shaking. He's the one who can't code. Ask him. Ask him to explain the third-order derivative in the backpropagation script. Ask him to write a single line of the kernel. Vance laughed, a dry, cruel sound. I'm a tenured professor, Kenji. I don't need to prove I can code to a student who just got caught red-handed. My record speaks for itself. Yours. Well, your record is over. Dean Miller stood up. We need to deliberate. Kenji, leave the room. Leave your laptop. Everything stays here for the integrity subcommittee to review. But, out, Miller snapped. I walked out of room 304. The hallway was empty. The silence was deafening. I stood there, staring at the closed door, hearing the muffled voices of the people who were currently dismantling my life. I thought about my father. I thought about the Shupanaki Habara. I thought about the $12 million Vance was going to make off my back while I was being deported as a thief. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Marcus, the consultant. He was standing there, leaning against the wall, a smug, punchable grin on his face. "Tough break, kid," Marcus whispered. "You should have just taken the phase out and left quietly. Vance doesn't like loose ends." He leaned in closer, his voice a hiss. "By the way, that 12 million, it just went up to 15. The investors loved the Vance architecture. We're signing the papers this afternoon. Thanks for the heavy lifting." He patted my arm and walked away, whistling a tune. I stood there for a long time. My heart was no longer racing. The panic was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, absolute vacuum. Vance thought he had executed me. He thought he had taken everything, but he was wrong about one thing. He thought the killing floor was where my story ended. He didn't realize that I had left my laptop in that room, and on that laptop, the final version of Chimera was currently verifying the integrity of the committee's network. Vance wanted my work. Fine. I was going to give him exactly what he asked for. I was going to give him a masterpiece that would burn his entire life to the ground. I took a deep breath. I walked toward the exit. I didn't wait for the committee's decision. I didn't need to. I had a phone call to make to a certain group of unethical white hat hackers I'd met on a dark web forum during my late night coding sessions. And I had a private key that needed to be activated. The breaking point had passed. Now it was time for the meltdown. I didn't go back to my apartment. I didn't call my father to tell him the dream was dead. If I heard his voice, I would break, and I couldn't afford to break. Not yet. Instead, I went to a 24-hour internet cafe 3 miles off campus, a place where no one knew Dr. Julian Vance and no one cared about neural networks. I paid in cash for a private booth. The air was thick with the smell of cheap tobacco and burnt coffee. It was perfect. I sat down, cracked my knuckles, and opened a terminal. Vance thought he had won because he held the physical manuscript and the official server logs. But he was a man of the old world, a world of paper, titles, and handshakes. He didn't understand that in the world of high-frequency AI, the truth isn't what a bean says in a boardroom. The truth is what the compiler says. First, I reached out to the Collective. They were a group of fringe developers and white hats I'd assisted on an open-source encryption project a year ago. They didn't care about my PhD. They cared that I'd helped them solve a prime factorization bottleneck that had stumped them for months. "I need a favor," I typed into the encrypted chat. "I need a global broadcast of a verification key. And I need a digital forensic audit of a proprietary server. It's a snake hunt for the guy who gave us the ghost protocol. Anything." The reply came back instantly. My plan had 3 layers: the poison, the public reveal, and the financial ruin. Layer 1, the poison. Vance and Marcus were planning to demo Chimera to their Series A investors in exactly 48 hours. They had the stolen version from my laptop, the one the committee had confiscated. What they didn't know was that the version on that laptop contained a logic parasite. I had designed Chimera to be incredibly robust, but I'd added a hidden dependency. The AI required a specific heartbeat-like signal from my private encrypted USB drive to maintain its sanity. Without that signal, the AI wouldn't just stop working, it would begin to hallucinate with extreme confidence. It would look perfect on the surface. The UI would be slick. The initial results would look brilliant. No 3 30-minute reporting code nachent perpicivates I own stones waste. It would start seeing patterns that didn't exist. It would take an investor's financial data and optimize it by suggesting they liquidate everything and buy stock in defunct companies. It would do it with 99.9% certainty. Layer 2, the signature. I had buried a watermark of shame in the compiled binary. Vance claimed he wrote the code, but I had used a technique called steganographic code injection. Throughout the millions of lines of C++, I had arranged the null space characters, the empty bits that do nothing, into a sequence. If you ran a simple script to extract those bits, they formed a perfect, high-resolution image of my original handwritten notes from 3 years ago. Each page watermarked with "Property of Kenji Sato, stolen by Julian Vance." It was a digital DNA test. It didn't matter what the university's official log said. If Vance tried to sell this code to a tech giant like Google or Amazon, their due diligence teams would find the watermark in seconds. He was trying to sell a stolen car with the VIN number etched into every single spark plug. Layer 3, the financial trap. This was the most dangerous part. I knew which VC firm was backing Vance. Silver Lake Partners. I knew their lead scout, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, was a stickler for founder market fit. I created a burner identity, an anonymous whistleblower from the CS department. I didn't send her a rant. I sent her a technical challenge. "Dear Miss Jenkins," I wrote, "you are about to invest $15 million in the Vance architecture. Ask Dr. Vance to explain the zero-point convergence in Module 7. If he can't explain the math, ask yourself why the inventor doesn't know how his own engine starts. And tell him to check the Easter egg hidden in the metadata of the demo build." I wasn't just trying to stop him from getting the money. I wanted him to take the money first. If he signed the contract and took the wire transfer under false pretenses, it wasn't just academic misconduct anymore. It was securities fraud. It was a federal crime. I spent the rest of the night writing a truth bomb script. It was a simple countdown. In 48 hours, at the exact moment Vance was scheduled to walk onto the stage at the Global Tech Innovation Summit, his big debut, the script would go live. It would push my entire GitHub history, every timestamped commit from my private server, every video of me explaining the code to a blank wall at 4 a.m., and the watermark extraction tool to every major tech news outlet and the university's entire board of trustees. But I needed one more thing. I needed Vance to feel safe. I sent him an email from my university account. I made it look desperate. "Dr. Vance, I'm sorry for the outburst. I was under a lot of stress. I realize now that I was confused and that your guidance was the real foundation of the project. Please, can we talk about a way for me to stay in the lab as an assistant? I just want my degree. I'll sign whatever you want." His reply came back 2 hours later. It was short and dripping with arrogance. "Kenji, it's too late for apologies. The committee is moving for expulsion. I suggest you pack your things and find a flight home. Your lack of integrity has no place in my lab. Do not contact me again." I stared at the screen and smiled. It was the first time I'd smiled in months. He'd taken the bait. He was so convinced of his own brilliance, so sure that he had crushed me, that he didn't even stop to wonder if I was still a threat. He was walking into the stadium, thinking he was the star of the show, not realizing I'd already rigged the floor with C4. I left the internet cafe as the sun was beginning to rise. The world looked different. The fear was gone. The weight of my father's expectations didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like fuel. I went home, took a long shower, and slept for 12 hours straight. I didn't dream. I didn't worry. I knew exactly what was coming. I reminded my father the weight of my burden and feed. "Look up," I said. The next day, I saw a post on LinkedIn. It was a photo of Vance and Marcus clinking champagne glasses. The caption read, "The future of AI is here. See you at the summit tomorrow. Vance AI, new beginnings." I whispered to the screen. "See you there, Julian." I spent the final hours before the summit at a small, quiet park near the university. I watched the students walking by, laughing, complaining about their midterms. I envied them for a moment. They still believed the system was fair, but I wasn't an apprentice mixing paint anymore. I was the architect of a storm, and that storm was about to make landfall in the middle of a $15 million press conference. The plan was set. Dead man's switch was active. All I had to do was wait for the clock to hit 0. The Global Tech Innovation Summit looked like a scene from a sci-fi movie. Blue neon lights, pulsing bass music, and hundreds of people in tech fleece vests sipping sparkling water. On the main stage, a massive 40-foot LED screen displayed the Kona Vance AI logo in shimmering gold. I was there, but I wasn't in the crowd. I was sitting in a parked car 2 blocks away. My laptop perched on my knees, connected to a dedicated 5 grams hotspot. I had a front row seat through the event's official live stream. At exactly 2 p.m., the music cut out, the lights dimmed. Dr. Julian Vance walked onto the stage. He looked magnificent. He was wearing a custom-tailored charcoal suit and a headset mic. He didn't look like a professor. He looked like a prophet. For decades, we have taught machines to follow our rules, Vance began, his voice smooth and commanding. Today, I am here to show you a machine that has learned to think for itself. I call it Chimera. The crowd erupted in applause. In the front row, I saw Sarah Jenkins from Silver Lake Partners and Marcus Thorne. Marcus was grinning, already looking like he was mentally spending his first million. We aren't just looking at code, Vance continued, pacing the stage with practiced grace. We are looking at the Vance methodology, a recursive feedback loop that I developed over 5 years of intensive research. Let's see it in action. He gestured to a technician off stage. This was it. The confiscated laptop, my laptop, was hooked up to the main frame. Vance didn't even have to touch it. He just had to narrate the miracle. On the giant screen, the Chimera interface appeared. It was beautiful. I had spent 3 nights just on the data visualization. We will now feed Chimera a raw dataset of global market fluctuations from the last hour, Vance announced. In real time, it will identify arbitrage opportunities that no human or standard algorithm could detect. The data started flowing. The graphs were moving perfectly. 92% accuracy, 95%, 98%. The room was silent. You could hear a pin drop. Vance was basking in it. He was at the peak of his life. And then the 30-minute mark hit. My logic parasite woke up. It looked for the encrypted heartbeat from my USB drive. It found nothing. It realized its master was gone. And according to my instructions, it began to protect the IP by destroying the user. Suddenly, a red flickering started on the edge of the graph. As you can see, Vance said, his voice faltering for just a microsecond. The system is now adjusting for volatility. But the system wasn't adjusting. The accuracy metric suddenly jumped from 98% to negative 14,000%. The graph didn't just drop. It turned into a chaotic scribble that looked like a heart monitor during a cardiac arrest. The crowd started whispering. Sarah Jenkins leaned forward, her brow furrowed. A minor glitch, Vance laughed nervously. A rendering error in the UI. Marcus, check the feed. Marcus scrambled toward the tech booth, but it was too late. I hit the enter key on my laptop in the car. Command, execute stage 2, the signature. On the 40-foot screen, the market data vanished. In its place, a command prompt window opened. It was white text on a black background, moving at a blinding speed. What is this? Dean Miller's voice echoed from the VIP section. Julian, what's happening? Vance was frozen. He was staring at the screen like it was a ghost. The command prompt stopped. A single line of text appeared in the center of the screen in 500-point font. Critical error. Authorization failed. Attempting to extract original metadata. Then, the watermark of shame began to render. Because I had used steganography, the code started rebuilding my handwritten notes, bit by bit. First, the university saw the photo of my desk in B14. Then, they saw the legal pad pages dated 3 years ago. And finally, in a crushing blow of irony, the screen displayed a high-resolution scan of my father's electronics shop deed, with my signature in words, "This research is the sole property of Kenji Sato. All other claims are fraudulent." The silence in the room was no longer respectful. It was horrified. Julian, Sarah Jenkins stood up. Her voice was like ice. We just wired the first $5 million of the Series A 10 minutes ago. Is this a joke? It's a hack. Vance screamed into his headset. His voice went shrill. The prophet was gone. The panicked rat had returned. Kenji, this is that disgruntled student. He's sabotaging the presentation. Security, shut it down. I can't shut it down, Dr. Vance. The technician yelled from the back. The colonel has locked us out. It's self-destructing. Actually, it wasn't self-destructing. It was doing something much worse. My script triggered the public disclosure packet. Every journalist in the room suddenly got a notification on their phones. Every board member at the university got an email. It contained the full time-stamped history of the project. It contained the audio recording I'd made of Vance in the hotel bar in San Diego, where he told me Michelangelo's assistants don't sign the chapel. And then, the final blow. The scream changed one last time. It showed the venture capital term sheet I'd found in the trash. The one proving Vance and Marcus were starting a company using university resources without disclosure. Vance was standing in the middle of the stage, bathed in the red light of the trash. Error screen. He looked small. He looked old. He looked like a thief caught with his hand in the vault. I can explain, Vance stammered, but nobody was listening. Sarah Jenkins was already on her phone, likely calling her legal team to freeze the wire transfer and file charges for wire fraud. Marcus tried to run for the side exit, but he was stopped by two men in dark suits who had been standing by the doors. They weren't hotel security, they were university police, accompanied by a representative from the state attorney's office. I watched the screen as the dean walked onto the stage. He didn't look at Vance. He looked at the camera. "This presentation is over," Miller said, his voice shaking with rage. "Dr. Vance, you are relieved of all duties effective immediately. An investigation into criminal intellectual property theft is underway." I closed my laptop. The car was quiet. Outside, the rain had stopped. I took a deep breath of the damp, cool air. I pulled my phone out and called my father. "Hello?" he answered. He sounded tired. It was 4 a.m. in Tokyo. "Father," I said. My voice was steady. "The defense is over." "And?" he asked. I could hear the hope in his voice, the hope he'd been carrying for 4 years. "I brought honor to the name," I said, "and I'm coming home. But I think I'm gonna be starting my own company soon." I put the car in gear and drove away. I didn't need to see the rest. I didn't need to see the handcuffs or the headlines. The machine had recognized its master, and the master was finally free. They say justice moves slowly, but in the digital age, a reputation can vanish in the time it takes for a server to ping. The fallout from the Vance AI disaster was a nuclear winter for everyone involved. Within 48 hours, Dr. Julian Vance went from being the face of modern AI to being a pariah. The university didn't just fire him, they scrubbed him. His name was removed from the faculty directory, his access cards were deactivated, and the locks on his mahogany office were changed while he was still being questioned by the campus police. Because I had involved the state attorney and Silver Lake partners, it wasn't just an internal academic matter, it was a criminal investigation into wire fraud and grand larceny of intellectual property. The $15 million Series A funding became the anchor that dragged Vance and Marcus to the bottom of the ocean. Vance tried to fight it, of course. He hired a high-priced lawyer who tried to claim that I was a cyber terrorist, who had manipulated the data to frame a brilliant man. But you can't argue with the compiler. The FBI's cybercrimes unit performed their own audit, and they found the watermark of shame I'd hidden in the code. They found the logs Marcus had created when he copied my drive, logs that clearly showed the files originated on my local machine months before Vance claimed to have invented them. The last I heard of Julian Vance, he was selling his designer furniture in his apartment to pay for a legal defense that was already failing. He wasn't the prophet anymore. He was just a middle-aged man who had forgotten how to do the work, trying to survive on a lie that had finally run out of air. Marcus Thorne fared even worse. Silver Lake partners sued him personally for breach of contract and misrepresentation. Since he wasn't a tenured professor with legacy status, he was an easy target. He's currently working as an entry-level IT consultant in a different state, his name forever blacklisted from any venture capital firm with a search engine. As for the university, they tried to do damage control. Dean Miller called me a week after the summit. His tone was a complete 180 from the killing floor. "Kenji," he said, his voice dripping with forced warmth. "We've reviewed the findings. It's a tragedy what happened. We want to make it right. We've decided to award you your PhD posthumously. Retrospectively, effective immediately. We'd also like to offer you a junior faculty position and full ownership of the Chimera patents. I sat in my small room, listening to the man who had kicked me out of my own defense. I felt a strange sense of calm. "I'll take the degree, Dean Miller," I said. "I earned that, but the patents? Those are already being managed by my legal team. And as for the faculty position, I think I've had enough of the basement for one lifetime." I didn't stay in the States to watch the trial. I didn't need the satisfaction of seeing Vance in a courtroom. I had my degree, and more importantly, I had the respect of the people who actually mattered, the developers and engineers who had seen the truth in the code. I went back to Tokyo. The first thing I did was visit my father. He didn't ask about the drama or the headlines. He just looked at the diploma in its leather case. Then he looked at me. "You look older," he said. "It was a long 4 years, Father." "But the shop?" he asked, looking around his small apartment. I handed him a check. It wasn't just the money he'd spent on my tuition. It was enough to buy the entire block in Akihabara. "The shop is coming back," I told him, "and this time it's going to have the best lab in the world on the second floor." I didn't hide in Japan, though. I did exactly what I told Vance I'd do. I started my own company. I called it Sato Neural. I didn't build it on charisma or TED Talks. I built it on the one thing Vance could never steal, the ability to actually solve the problem. I released a clean version of Chimera as open source, a gift to the community that had helped me take down a giant. By making it free, I ensured that Vance's stolen version was worth exactly 0. You can't sell something that the original creator has already given to the world for free. Within a year, Sato Neural became the industry standard for unsupervised learning. I don't work in a basement anymore. My office has windows that look out over the Tokyo skyline. I have my own students now. I remember the first day my first intern walked in. He was a bright kid from Osaka, nervous, clutching a laptop covered in stickers. He looked at me with the same hero worship I once had for Vance. I stood up, walked over to him, and shook his hand. "Welcome to the team," I said. "A few ground rules. First, your name goes first on everything you build. Second, if you ever get stuck on the math, we solve it together. And third," I pointed to the screen where the Sato Neural logo was glowing, "we don't mix paint here. We build worlds. And we always sign our work. Every now and then, I get a Google alert for Julian Vance." The most recent one was a small article in a local paper about a disgraced academic being denied a teaching license at a community college. I don't feel joy when I see it. I don't feel anger. I just feel finished. The machine I built is now running on millions of servers across the globe. It's helping doctors diagnose diseases, helping engineers build safer bridges, and helping scientists understand the stars. And buried in the core of every single one of those systems, invisible to the eye but permanent as a heartbeat, is a small string of hex code. If you know where to look, it still says, "Property of Kenji Sato." My father once told me that a man's honor is his shadow. It can be long or short, but it always follows him. Vance tried to steal my shadow. He thought he could walk in the sun while I stayed in the dark. But he forgot that without the light of the truth, there is no shadow at all. I'm standing in the light now, and for the first time in my life, the view is perfect.